John Weaver, Psych D, is a licensed psychologist who received his doctorate in psychology from Wisconsin School of Professional Psychology. He has a master's degree in science and clinical psychology from Marquette University, where it's really cold, and a master's of divinity from St. Francis School of Pastoral Ministry. John designed the Healthy Thinking Initiative and has coordinated the efforts of the development team. He has taught mindfulness to groups and individuals since 1997 and has been engaged in his own mindfulness work since 1972, when he was 2. Just seeing if you're paying attention. He has worked as a clinical psychologist and a business consultant for more than 20 years and practical experience with organizational individuals and groups. He is the author of 9 articles for business publications, including Surviving Real-World Stress and Remedies for Workplace Violence. Are you ready to start?
I'm ready to start.
Great.
Well, welcome everybody. We've got about an hour worth of time, and I'm going to try to get through, as I was telling Michael, about 3 hours worth of material. So we'll be picking and choosing a little bit as we go through the slides. Excuse me, and I want to save about 10 minutes or so that we can have some questions. As we get started, I'm going to have you start by doing a little bit of an exercise. And so I'd like you, if you've got a pencil and paper or a vivid imagination, to write down for yourself or think of 4 things that you can do to be happy. And we'll come back to this in just a couple of minutes and why that particular question would come up in the context of a talk on love and wellness. But let me give you just a couple of statistics as we get started here. The longest running psychological study of all time, a study that was done of Harvard men, followed 268 men from the beginning of their college years in the 1930s until today. They recently asked George Vaillant, who's a psychologist and who's been overseeing the study for the last 45 years, if he could summarize the results of the study, and he said, I can summarize it in one word: love. What he found was that the key to living a long life overwhelmingly seemed to revolve around those people who could report that they had good social interactions and essentially love in their lives. So it can be a little bit hard to understand how love might be related to wellness, but let me give you some basic facts, and then we're going to take a look at how there are other connections that may even mean more. If you are connected to a person that smokes and they are a close friend of yours, you have a 61% higher chance that you will be a smoker than if you're not connected to anybody that smokes. If that person who's a smoker is a friend of one of your good friends, you still have a 29% higher chance that you'll smoke. And if it's a friend of your good friend, you still have an 11% higher probability that you'll be a smoker. In addition, if your best friend is obese, there's a 57% chance that you'll be obese. If one of your brothers or sisters is obese, there's a 40% chance that you'll be obese. And if your spouse is obese, you have a 37% chance that you'll be obese. These kinds of social relationships have a direct impact on our health. If you're in an unhappy marriage, it increases your likelihood of getting sick by 35%, and that same unhappy marriage will shorten your life by an average of 4 years and raise your blood pressure by 30 points. In fact, if you spend 20 minutes a day connecting with good friends, it will give you a 3 times better health outcome than if you spent that same 20 minutes in aerobic exercise. So on a very direct level, our social connections have more to do with wellness than we often think. Let's start talking a little bit about what we know about social connections. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about some research that's being done at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm from Wisconsin, and Madison is right down the road from me, so I'm always interested in the research that a psychologist by the name of Richard Davidson is doing. And Richard Davidson, interestingly enough, has been doing research with the Dalai Lama, the head of Tibetan Buddhism. And back in 1990, one of the things that he and the Dalai Lama talked about when they were first talking about the potential to do some research, the Dalai Lama said, you know, as psychologists, you know a great deal about depression and anxiety and alcohol abuse and the different maladies that people have. Wouldn't it be interesting if you put the same energy into studying compassion, which is a term that the Dalai Lama started to use, and Richard Davidson then began to look at that. And so in 1990, he tells the story that he went to the research literature to see what had already been done on compassion. And he put in that as a search term in one of the search engines that he had, looked through all of the journal articles and all of the books and found 0 references to compassion. Some 20 years later, in 2010, it's one of the most commonly studied terms of any of the terms in the psychological literature. Davidson started this by studying some monks, and the studies that he did are really pretty fascinating. So the picture that you hopefully are seeing on your screen is of a monk that's being wired up with an EEG. And this is the kind of apparatus that was being used for this study on compassion. And in fact, this picture is a study of one of the monks that was being studied. Now, these monks had to have a certain, meet a certain level of criteria in order to be participants in this study. They had to have a minimum of 10,000 hours of documented time practicing mindfulness meditation. That roughly translates into 5 years full-time meditating. In fact, the average for the monks in this particular study was 23,000 hours of documented meditation time, and one of the monks, the lead monk in this research, had 63,000 hours of documented meditation time. So the monks were given a simple task. They were asked to do a breathing meditation, and then about 10 minutes into the breathing meditation, they were shown a picture of a child with a deformed face and asked to meditate in bringing up feelings of compassion for this face. A few minutes later, that face was withdrawn, and they were asked to go back to a breathing meditation, and then the face was reintroduced and then withdrawn again. So a fairly simple design to see what would happen when to brain activity as the monks were engaging in feelings of compassion. If any of you have ever tried to look at an EEG readout, it's normally a very confusing picture and takes a great deal of expertise to interpret. But these particular results were absolutely crystal clear, and I wish I had a slide where I could show them to you, because you could all see exactly when the monks were doing the breathing meditation, when the compassion meditation started, when they went back to the breathing meditation, when the compassion meditation restarted. It's absolutely crystal clear, which is a testament to the clarity of mind that occurs when you meditate that long. But the other thing that happened was that as they were recording the brain waves, something amazing started to happen. As these monks were generating feelings of compassion for the photo of this child with a deformed face, the brain waves that they generated were brain waves that we normally associated with human happiness. And those brain waves were in fact registering higher levels of happiness than had ever been recorded in any study in history up until that point. That has some interesting implications. Oftentimes we think of happiness as things like, you know, if I had more success in my life, or if I had more wealth, or if I had an easier life, somehow my life would be happier. But what this study and others have shown is that in reality, feelings of compassion, feelings for caring for other people, are those feelings that generate for us the highest levels of satisfaction, the deepest levels of happiness of any that are around. And if you think about it, that actually makes sense. If you think about the times when you're actually the happiest, it is probably at times when you feel really deeply connected with another human being, and in some way are having a positive impact for them because of the connection that you're having with them. So if on your list of 4 things that would make you happy, you don't have compassion, cross one of them out real quick and write compassion down there as one of those things that would make you happy. So we have some interesting things that come up with that. Now, one of the questions that arises is, why is it that you know, in 1990, Richard Davidson wasn't able to find anything about compassion in his research, or at least in the studies that he was trying to do to see who had researched things before. And one of the answers to this is that in the Western tradition, we have something that happened at the time of the beginning of the 16th century. So about during the time of René Descartes, we had a lot of things that were going on. Science was beginning to emerge. Christianity was still the dominant force in societal control, and the Christian church had suffered some setbacks by finding out that, in fact, the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, and in fact the Earth was part of a galaxy that went around the sun. So some of these revolutions with Galileo and Copernicus had just come along, and now René Descartes wanted to study the human person. He wanted to begin what we now call the science of medicine. The church tried to prevent him from doing this, saying that that the human was part of the church's domain, and this battle was settled by striking a deal. The deal was that science could study the material world, and that the church held sway over the spiritual world. That meant that René Descartes could study the human body, but things that were part of the spiritual world were set as off limits. That split, which became known as the mind-body split, still exists in many ways today. So one of the things that Davidson noted was that we know more about how to build an atomic bomb than we know about human compassion. And the reason for that was that we believe that the human person, morality, compassion, things like that, were part of the spiritual realm, and therefore were kind of off limits to scientific study, whereas things like electrons and hydrogen atoms and fission, those were all part of the material world and were things that we could be quite comfortable studying. Therefore, we simply didn't turn our attention to things like compassion, love, caring, and things like that. And even today, you find a fair amount of nervousness among scientists when we step into this realm. So we talk about social relationships and connections much more easily than we talk about or use the term love in these areas. As
John,
we did this...
Oh, sorry. Would you mind if I interrupted you just a
Sure.
second?
Sure.
Let's see. Laura would like to know if you could define compassion. Probably, I was thinking it might be important to help her and then anybody else better understand.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to talk about with compassion here, and excuse me if I... what I'm going to talk about is that compassion is the willingness to care about people and try to ease their suffering. We define this really rather broadly, so it's easy to imagine that suffering occurs when we have somebody who's in a hospital bed and their bodies are broken or they're depressed or whatever. But in reality, all of us are needing compassion in our lives because we all have moments of time in our lives where we get caught up in suffering, and the study of compassion is the study of how human beings reach out to each other in these times of need. This then forms the basis of how human beings connect with each other. So one of the questions of all of that comes up and has come up repeatedly in the initiation of this study is that we've taken kind of a place in which we've made an assumption, and the assumption has been that human beings are basically selfish and that we connect with one another to further our own self-interest, and that connection then forms social bonds and moves forward. What we need to understand is that actually turns out to be an assumption. And it's an assumption that as we're making more and more efforts to understand how human beings connect to each other, turns out to be less and less likely to be true. It appears as though the willingness to be compassionate to one another, to make these connections, to develop love, appears to be, from a scientific standpoint, much more likely to be a normal, deeply held part of our biology. So in order to talk about this, we're going to go to another interesting researcher. This researcher is a researcher by the name of Robert Sapolsky. And Robert Sapolsky is, if I can get it to the right slide here, Robert Sapolsky is a biologist at Stanford, and he's been at Stanford for somewhere north of 30 years now. And as part of his research, he teaches during the school year, and then every summer he takes a trip over to Africa, and he's been following baboon troops. Now, I know this is a chimpanzee that you're seeing, but I couldn't find a baboon, so it's the one that we're going to use today. But Robert Sapolsky has been following these baboon troops to watch their organization, and he's been taking blood samples of these baboons and learning about how cooperation in baboon troops leads to their organization and their hierarchy and who's stressed and who isn't. So among the things that he discovered was that baboons have a very clear hierarchy, and the higher you are in the male hierarchy of being a baboon, the less stress you have. The lower you are in that hierarchy, the more you produce stress hormones like cortisol, which is one of the more longer-lasting stress hormones. And if you're a female baboon, you have stress hormones dependent upon how well you're treated by the social the tops of the social hierarchy of the male baboons. So Sapolsky followed these particular baboon troops he had been following them for about 20 years when one summer he arrived in Africa and located one of his most important research troops, and a disaster had occurred. The baboon troop had been moving close to one of the local villages in that particular region of Africa, and the local villagers had piled up their garbage just outside the village. The baboon troop discovered that the garbage had lots of food that was being thrown away. They ate the food, and half of the baboon troop had died from food that they had eaten that was poisoned. It was a disaster for Sapolsky. 20 years of research had ground to a halt. He had a troop that was decimated. And then he began to realize something that was pretty interesting. It had turned out that the baboons, the half of the baboon tribe that had died, wasn't random. And in fact, what had happened is that the highest levels of the hierarchy of the baboon troop had been the ones that had eaten the food in the trash dumps because it was easy food and they always ate first. And they were the ones that got sick and died. So essentially what happened is that all of the leaders of the baboon troop died. The males that were left were the males that were the lowest levels of the social hierarchy. They were the ones that actually were responsible for carrying the female troop. So they would be, instead of being aggressive, they were gentle, they groomed the females, they helped take care of the young baboons, they essentially acted like they were compassionate toward the rest of the troop. Sapolsky decided to follow them and see what would happen. And what happened after that was pretty amazing. The entire troop's social character changed within a very short period of time, and it became a troop in which the highest hierarchy males became more and more compassionate towards everyone else. And instead of being aggressive and climbing the social ladders, the way that you became highly placed in the social hierarchy of this baboon troop was to take care of other people or other baboons within the tribe, to take care of the females, to take care of the young, to take care of the other males. Now it turns out that baboons, when they are ready to mate, they leave their native tribe, and as adolescents they travel and join a new tribe, a new troop, There isn't there isn't a passing on of genetics from within the troop, but actually from troop to troop. What Sapolsky realized was that as these new adolescents joined this troop, they didn't join the troop and maintain the aggressive behavior they had seen in previous troops. They joined the troop and became compassionate, like the troop's character had been when they joined it. And over the span of 2 or 3 generations since then, this troop has maintained this character, even though now all of those baboons who had been alive when this disaster happened are now dead and have been replaced by new baboons who have taken their place. This compassionate characteristic has continued to be the characteristic of this troop. As new adolescents join them, they learn that the way to become important in this troop is to take care of everyone else. Pretty interesting to see that this was not something that genetically was transmitted, this kind of aggressive hierarchy, but in fact is really a social characteristic. And that a new social characteristic can be passed on. By the way, we share about 95% of our genetics with baboons, so it makes it really calls into question whether we can say that aggressiveness is a genetically inherited human characteristic as well. So pro-social behavior are clearly to emerge in children by about age 3. We're going to run through a little bit of this pretty quickly. There are 2 polarities that we have to deal with. So people who are overly trusting, naive, aren't very successful. People who are overly suspicious also aren't very successful. And in fact, what we need is this balance in between. What's very interesting is there's been some research that shows that the people who are most suspicious are actually worse at picking out people who are lying to them than people who are more trusting. When we think about that, it makes some sense because what happens is that people who are more trusting are better able to read the signals of people who are around them. Being trusting doesn't mean you naively believe everything, but it means that you're willing to give somebody the benefit of a doubt and you actually listen more carefully. People who are more suspicious tend to reject everything, and therefore, while they aren't likely to believe someone who is lying to them, they also aren't likely to believe people who are telling them the truth. So they are much worse at being able to tell whether someone is lying to them or not. They make a pretty ineffective assumption that that people generally are lying to them when people generally aren't. There are some insights that we have then from Tibetan Buddhism that are important. One of them is that compassion is actually a distinct emotion. It doesn't mean feeling sorry for someone. It means being willing to help when someone is in a place where they're suffering. So you can be compassionate without feeling bad for the person that you are helping, at least from their perspective. Now, we have to understand that in the West we basically have six basic emotions: mad, sad, glad, afraid, ashamed, and hurt. In Tibet, they list 84,000 emotions. Their understanding of how human beings function emotionally is far more sophisticated than ours. And one of the things that they believe is that this ability to want to help another person is a clearly distinct emotion, and it doesn't involve necessarily feeling sympathy for someone else. in order to be compassionate, it requires focus. So one of the things that we would say then is that the ability to really care about another person requires that we actually notice what's going on with them, that we're able to focus it, we're able to pull ourselves away from other distractions and stay with that. That may be one reason why the monks are able to achieve higher levels of happiness, is because they have that level of focus. There's a willingness to extend loving kindness, which is basically born out of the sense that someone has given me loving kindness, and that's why I exist in this world, that I can then extend that same loving kindness to myself, and that's often a challenge for people, but a very important part of developing the ability to care for another person or care about another person. That then gets extended to people who we love, to people who are interacting with us who are more neutral. You know, we underappreciate how interconnected we are. If you think of even the ability to listen into a webinar like this, there are countless numbers of people that are involved in keeping internet accesses available, in putting together computers and headphones and all of the different things that we use in order to be able to connect with each other. All of them allow us to have the life that we have. And of course, loving kindness even involves extending that to those who have hurt us. I'd like to spend time on that, but I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. Suffice it to say that when we harbor feelings of anger, hostility, hurt for other people, that actually hurts us more than it hurts them, because we live with it all the time, and they only are aware of it when we're directly interacting with them. So that one of the challenges of being truly compassionate and truly caring is to find ways to release those feelings, which is not the same as being willing to be hurt by other people, but to not harbor those feelings of hurt. So that's another element of how this loving kindness, this compassion, this ability to love really develops. So the journey to be more compassionate involves several different features. By the way, that little boy that's sitting so cutely in front of that old steering wheel, that's me when I was 4. My father took that picture of me, and even though Michael had said that I was only 2 when I started doing my mindfulness meditation, the fact is that I'm actually a pretty old guy, as you can tell from that car. But the journey to become more compassionate entails several key elements. The first is that it is necessary to develop emotional control. I had a really good example of this a number of years ago. I was working with a person who was an owner of a relative medium-sized business, probably 200 employees, going through some really rough times, and he began to worry that his business was going to go bankrupt. This became something that preoccupied him. He'd wake up in the middle of the night sweating because he was so worried about it. He had this image of himself homeless on the street and unable to care for his family, and his family rejecting him and leaving him alone and miserable. And he talked to me about, he got out of his car in the middle of the city where he lived, and this homeless man started coming up to him, and he looked at him, and all he could see was himself, and he got back in the car and drove away. And this is not the characteristic of this particular human being. He's normally a very caring, very compassionate individual, but in this state of emotional distress, he couldn't control that for himself, and therefore he didn't have the capacity to have compassion for this homeless person at that time. Good news is that his business has survived and is doing very well now, and he has learned from that situation and is working on developing more emotional control in his own life. But for all of us, we can think about it, and one of the real barriers we often have to really loving someone else is our own emotions get out of control. We get fearful, we get preoccupied, we get distressed, and suddenly we lose the ability to really care for another person. It requires, in order to really truly love someone, to develop a moral base. It is not possible for us to really fully care about another human being without being willing to look at what's really important and what's less important, and really have a sense for what really are our values. The Dalai Lama points out that developing good morality is really something that needs to be practiced even on the smallest things, because when a big thing happens, what will happen is that during a period of intense stress or a period of overwhelming difficulties, we will do what we've always done. And if what we've always done has been truly a reflection of our values will be there. If what we've always done has been to excuse ourselves and give ourselves the easy way out, then when a distressing occurrence comes along, that's what we'll do. So those small acts of kindness, those small acts of compassion really make a difference. There is a need, in order to really care about another person, to develop a sense of empathy. And that is essentially the willingness to try to put ourselves in another person's shoes. Again, we have a capacity to do this, and within our brain systems, we have something called a mirror neuron. A mirror neuron allows us to see what's going on with another human being and to feel the same feelings. That appears to be part of what happens when we look at the statistics about, if you've got a close friend that's obese, you're more likely to be obese yourself. It appears to be a function of the mirror neurons. We do what other people around us that we find important are doing. Advertisers know this, by the way, and one of the reasons that they want to place their products within the TV shows or movies that we're watching is that they know that the mirror neurons will be activated, and if we see someone drinking a favorite beverage, we're going to suddenly have an impulse to want to drink the same favorite beverage ourselves. That is what empathy is. It's this ability to feel what someone around us is feeling. It is also one of the reasons why it's harder to listen to somebody in a webinar like this than it is to watch them in person, because we don't get the benefit of what goes on with the mirror neuron system when we're just hearing the voice and we're not able to see the facial expressions of the people around us. It is also necessary, if we are truly to be compassionate, that we act on that compassion. So it's not just a feeling. And one of the interesting things of the monks that were studied was that when that compassion was being registered, it was being registered parts of the brain that are the parts of the brain that light up when we're preparing to act. So when we have these feelings, we want to do something. It brings up a whole other area, and something that that someday I hope we'll take a look at. So we sometimes talk about people having something we call compassion fatigue or burnout in jobs where we're doing work with people that is stressful work, or they're in trouble, or whatever. Wellness professionals, psychologists, social workers, doctors. My question is, we often assume that we get burnout because we work too hard. I wonder if we get burnout because we can't do those really compassionate things that we would like to do because we get stuck in bureaucracies or paperwork or other obstacles that keep us from really being able to reach out and help another human being the way that we would like. And perhaps the burnout that we're talking about is more the block to being able to really act on our compassion rather than being asked to give too much. I don't have any research that backs that up, and I don't know that it's true. It's just a question that I have. So that leaves us with some questions. One of the things that I think we sometimes overlook when we start to think about wellness in general. There are many facets to it, but one of the things that we now know is that we have good social connections. We really have a different sense of our willingness and our ability to help each other and connect to each other and even care for ourselves. So how much of our wellness programming is because someone spends 20 minutes walking, and how much of it is that they spend 20 minutes walking with a friend? We all know that we're more likely to continue to engage in physical exercise if we do it with a buddy, and we've often assumed that that's because that provides us with some level of accountability, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe there's a connection that we're actually making with another human being that adds value to a walk that's done with somebody versus a walk that's done alone. We share a healthy meal with someone who is also connecting with us in a social way. That makes as much of a difference as sharing a healthy or as eating the healthy meal itself does. Maybe there's a connection in the sharing part of it. And I think those are things that that we've sometimes overlooked in the way that we plan and put together our wellness programs. We often see it as helping people to make these individual decisions. Maybe we need to start re-looking at it and starting to see that this is also about helping people to make connections with other people. To help them to really become more more interconnected as part of the ability to really become healthy. So don't overlook the benefits of having social connections as part of the wellness program that you're doing. And I think we still have a lot to learn about how connecting with each other impacts our health in ways that that we're only beginning to understand. So there's a lot more that I could say, but I'm just gonna pause here for a minute, and this would be a good time for you to type some questions in if you've got some, and let's just kind of take some time and interact here a little bit, rather than you listening to me just talk all by myself.
Alrighty. Well, and also I think I forgot to say that if you have a microphone and or you're calling in through the regular phone line, if you'd like to say something, if you'd like to ask your question directly to John, I can unmute your microphone and you can do that. And while you're pondering these deep thoughts, let me say, let's see here. Sanja, I think, said, I guess kind of an observation. Seems that we are both selfish and compassionate. For example, the first item on her list was things that make them happy is do something for myself, and then the second one was do something for others. That's interesting. That was a pretty straightforward thought on what makes you happy.
Mm-hmm. So part of what we've learned is that if we can't offer compassion to ourselves, it's very difficult to offer it to another person. And so that's not something to be overlooked. But again, one of the ways that we learn to be compassionate to ourselves is that from infancy onward, there are important people in our lives who teach us how to do this. So I think there is a sense in which there's an interaction between these two things, and if we only give to others and we're not taking care of ourselves, we're probably not learning the things we need to learn in order to be effective at giving to others, as well as not really benefiting in the same way or able to sustain it in the same way.
Let's see, the questions are starting to show up quickly now. Jeff said, wants to know, do you have any references or resources that can show the connection between worksite wellness and social connection?
Sure. One of the I'm just trying to look over at my wall of books here so that I can give you a couple of quick connections. Visions of Compassion is something that was written by Ann Davidson, or Anne Hathaway, and Richard Davidson has some really excellent research on it, and you can get that through mindandlife.org, which is carries the transcripts of dialogues between the Dalai Lama and Western scientists. Another important book is Prosocial Motives, Emotions, and Behavior. That's edited by Mario McLusener and Philip Shaver, and that's available through the American Psychological Association. Those are two really good books and pretty good resources to start. The mindandlife.org website has a number of books on it that will flesh this out in more detail.
Great. John, could I ask you to just jot that down and put it in an email to me, and then I can put it up on the website so people can access it.
And I've got a longer bibliography that I can attach to that so that people can access it.
Oh, great. That would be good. Okay, let's see. This is from Lynn. Since much of our interactions are now internet-based, do you have any ideas about how to grow the opportunities for positive social interaction as well as opportunities to be compassionate?
So this is a bigger question than it might seem. One of the one of the things that's going on right now is we're engaging in a worldwide social experiment that's never been tried before. We can connect in ways that are absolutely amazing and interesting and intriguing and energizing. The fact that I can sit here in my room in Wisconsin and talk to people all over the country, and we can connect this way is an absolutely amazing thing. And yet it's very different than the normal way that human beings have connected throughout our human history, which has included up until really spanning the last 80 or 85 years, has always been face-to-face. And so we have no idea what the implications are going to be for some of this. I think one of the pushes that we have to be able to have face-to-face interactions with Skype or you know, the things that are able to be done on phones these days with video conferencing is this desire to be able to connect not just with text or voice, but to be able to put this whole person back into the process. So I don't know where we're going to end up on this, but I think it's an important dimension that we have to be paying attention to as we go forward and are trying to understand this new form of communication and what the implications will be for human beings.
Wow, I've never really thought about it that way. It is really it's a huge shift in such a short period of time. Let's see. Marcia said, can you talk about capacity to love / compassion and stress?
Sure.
Another big topic.
We know that that stress increases, and it increases dramatically when social connections are broken. One of the it's a whole other topic, and like I said, this could easily go on for 3, 4, or 5 hours as we talk about this. But one of the things that we know is that children who are subjected to early childhood abuse, basically their social connections are negative rather than positive, develop reactions in their immune functioning that are lifelong. It's something that they never fully are able to normalize. That doesn't mean that they can't live very productive and even very happy lives, but there's this fragility that occurs because our cellular processes are set in many ways in these early years, and they reinforce themselves. One of the really fascinating potential of more about this is that we may be learning systematic ways to increase the capacity to make social connections and therefore be able to reverse some of these early childhood issues. But left to its own, what happens when people break those connections, you know, cortisol levels go up, immune functioning goes down, blood pressure levels go up. We have all of these reverberations in our systems when that capacity to love is disrupted in some way.
Wow. So much. I could see why you could certainly make this a 3 or 4 hour or longer presentation. There's so much that, sorry about that.
It's okay.
I can't.
Everybody do an Irish jig now.
That's right. Darn it. My two-year record ruined.
Anyway. I thought that was great.
Okay, now kind of blew my concentration. Focus. Yeah. So anyway, great, really great presentation, John. I think we have answered all the questions for now. I'm sure you guys will come up with more, but I really appreciate it, John, and maybe we could have you come back and talk more about some of the nuances, I guess, that you really couldn't cover in an hour.
Yeah, we can do that, and we might want to divide it out a little bit and talk a little bit more specifically about some of the impacts in the workplace, or how it affects our closest love relationships, and start putting some of those things together as we move on into the future. Just drop Michael a line if you would like to do that, or if any of you would like to contact me directly. The slides will be up, and in the last slide, which I'm not showing here, you can get my email address, and feel free to contact me directly if you have additional questions or comments, or would like to establish a dialogue and try to figure out what all of this means.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the slides are already up on Health Promotion Live, which is where this recording will be later this afternoon. And yeah, I think it's a really good idea, John. If you have ideas on how you'd like to explore this further, do send me a note. John, you and I can make it happen. So
we will do that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John. I'm so glad that I was able to be here with you today. Usually it's Kelly, so I'm just so darn lucky. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.